Welcome to yet another episode of Disruption Talks focused on sustainability in the retail industry. It's already the third time this month we meet to speak about this topic. You can find recordings to the previous session on our YouTube channel, and the key takeaways will be published on our blog. And I will highly encourage you to check them to learn more about the problems we're currently facing from the environmental perspective in this industry. And today we'll talk about the food waste. Yesterday we actually celebrated the International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste, which I believe is not a coincidence. I'm Natalia, content team leader, and I will be moderating the discussion today with two amazing speakers, Jinder Kang, Innovation Consulting Lead at Netguru. Come, Jinder, how are you doing today?
Hi, Natalia. I'm very well today. Very excited for this conversation.
Amazing. Jinder has been involved in multiple projects consulting businesses in a wide variety of consumer sectors, helping them to drive innovation through impact and utility, including a project in collaboration with a food charity and the government body to combat the growing issue of food waste. And I will definitely want to dive deeper into that topic later. But before I'm gonna introduce our guest speaker from Delivery Hero, Patrick Rowse. How are you doing, Patrick, today?
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here with you, Jinder and Nat, today, and anyone watching. Really excited for today's talk.
Patrick Rowse is Sustainability Manager at Delivery Hero. He's an experienced professional with a passion for the environment and innovation. He's motivated by the concept of tangible good and using environmental economics to build sustainability directly into the core business strategy. I want to start today with a question about your personal habits. How do you manage your shopping, your personal habits at home, at your household, to reduce the food waste? Patrick, would you like to start?
Sure thing, absolutely. Well, in terms of my own personal habits, look, I wouldn't give myself an A+ in terms of doing all the right things to minimize food waste, I have to be honest. But what I try to do in my day-to-day is to kind of limit the amount of carbon that I use to acquire what I need, especially food. So living in Berlin, it's kind of easy to do that because I'm just constantly on my bike, rain, hail or snow, to do my shopping. I've got two big panniers on the sides of my bike, which I can easily fill up. So I do try and limit the environmental outcomes of my own groceries in that way. In terms of food waste in my own household, I obviously have a composting bin, as well as like a plastic bin, as well as a Restmüller or general waste bin, and try and utilize the sophistication that the German waste stream management system has as much as possible. But I'd feel like I'm a fairly lay person in this example. I feel like I probably represent what most Berliners are. So again, I wouldn't give myself an A+, but it's a very good question.
Yeah, Nat, thank you for digging very deep on our personal habits, putting us on the spot straight away. So similar to Patrick, I would say I wouldn't give myself an A+. I would say that the Jinder you would have met before I got involved with a food waste project and actually had my eyes opened was definitely nearer the F. But now what I look to do is very similar. We try and focus on buying the food we need for today and tomorrow. And we try not to have too many things where the expiration date is always a challenge. One of the biggest causes, I think, previously in my own existence was allowing things to expire. So now we have a tendency, and it's very convenient in living in Poland, to follow Patrick's route of using my bike. Also, I'm very scared of Polish drivers, so I use my bike a lot, and we try and use more kind of local markets where we can not have to buy things in single-use plastic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this one. And actually, so that one of the problems is buying in bulk, which a lot of supermarkets actually convince us to do so. And quick commerce, which is a rising thing right now, probably helps to decrease the amount of shopping we do. Like, we do it more often, it's more convenient, but we don't overbuy food that will potentially expire when we should have to throw it away. And what's the role of Delivery Hero in that area?
Great question, Nat. So as we've all probably been reading in all the papers, or certainly all the investment kind of articles of the last 2 or 3 years, there's this huge rise of this new business opportunity in quick commerce. And Delivery Hero, as a global player, also we do recognize that rise. So you've probably seen recently we have made some strategic investments into some existing quick commerce players like Gorillas, but we also do have our own wonderful quick commerce team here internally at Delivery Hero, trying to bring quick commerce solutions to lots of different markets simultaneously. So it's actually one of the fastest growing business sectors within the Delivery Hero organization, and we see some huge potential there for both sustainable outcomes, but also as well as business outcomes. So as you recognize, quick commerce can help kind of change the paradigm which most of us access our groceries by, and have us order kind of smaller volumes. And I think combining that kind of potential power, as well as the technology that's behind it, with these kind of more innovative kind of supply and demand matching AI models that are starting to exist, could be a huge revolution for the industry. So Delivery Hero sees this as a huge potential kind of growth industry, both for sustainability and also for business outcomes as well.
And I do believe that Jinder could add more into the AI technology innovation part.
So I wasn't actually going to focus on that initially right now. What I was going to say is about 10 years ago, when I first got involved in this subject, AI and ML wasn't really on the table as potential solutions, or ones that retailers would be willing to adopt in that moment. And during our research, we discovered, which is quite common knowledge now, I suppose, that the majority of food waste is occurs at the household side of things. So one of those quick drivers, I suppose, was trying to understand the reasons behind this, and expiration date was a leading cause of people binning food, shall we say. And the fact that quick commerce now exists enables us to try to almost have this just-in-time shopping for ourselves as well, not just something that the retailers need to focus on. It's something now that can enable our own actions and allow us to take a little bit more responsibility as well.
And should the consumers be more responsible for that, or should we put the responsibility on the retailers, producers? As I mentioned at the beginning, basically the retail industry is making us to buy more. There are a lot of discounts, promotions, buy 2 get 1 for 3, and so on. So it actually doesn't play into our advantage, because those kind of incentives make us buy more, and in a way that's why there's a lot of food being wasted in the households.
A very good question. I'm trying to think if I can pass this over to Patrick straight away. No, I'll have an attempt, right? And to be honest, it's this idea of the collective. We need to think about everybody's role in this. It occurs across the entire kind of supply and value chains, from farming, processing, packaging, manufacturing, transportation, logistics. That's where the food loss kind of occurs. And then the food waste is restaurants, retailers themselves, and households. But I don't think the emphasis is on one or the other. I think there's a role of responsibility for all of those actors to take upon themselves in order to really move the needle in reducing food waste. And
Patrick,
on that,
do you have anything
pass over to Patrick.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Jinder, I would mirror your comments. My thoughts here is it's an ecosystem, and there's different players within the ecosystem, and all of the players have to kind of move on this same agenda together. Obviously, some players inherently have more power than others, i.e., mass manufacturing food suppliers, or these aggregations that sometimes occur within within the farming industry. They obviously have a huge role to play, but also consumers have a role to play in terms of making informed and educated choices. And so in terms of what I see here is the potential that the kind of high technology solutions of quick commerce can bring to this space can act as a huge disruptive moving forward. So if you take a company like Delivery Hero, what do we do well? We're a technology company at our heart. And what our core business model, our traditional business model, is we've matched up consumers with restaurants and created, new demand and new ways of those two kind of different segments interacting. Now, if we take the quick commerce model, which we're also investing in, we can bring our high technology solutions, our high amounts of data analytics, our algorithm, all this AI potential, inject that right in the middle of this new ecosystem, and better match up the capacity and the demand between our consumers and the suppliers of the grocery goods. So the revolution that occurred in the kind of traditional food delivery industry, the way that you get your burger and chips these days, I see that kind of revolutionizing this space and having some huge advantages for food waste and food waste reduction overall.
And just to add one final point, Nat, and I won't be asking you about your direct habits right now, but I think the reason that people look towards the retailers as being a big player in helping to reduce this problem is, unlike the other members of that kind of value chain, they actually have direct influence over every single facet of that. They are in communication with manufacturers, processors, farmers, and the consumer. So they could and possibly should be taking a leading role in this. But once again, going back to what Patrick and I were saying, it is very much an ecosystem that needs to be educated and enabled in order to reduce this.
And when it comes to education, what can be done a little bit more to make the consumer more aware of their daily choices, habits?
Well, to make people more aware of the importance of food waste overall, I think it's correct. These kind of big headline stealing facts, they're the things that we remember, and they're the things that will kind of change the paradigm moving forward for all those conversations in all parts of this value chain. So, some of those big facts, as I think as it was discussed a lot in the last couple of days, we've got 8 to 10% of the current carbon emissions in the world coming from food waste. Now, if we think about the kind of environmental challenges that the world is currently facing, we've got the first order problem of global warming. The reason why we call it a first order problem is because all other problems kind of feed into that and make it worse. And then we've got second order problems like the global plastic pollution problem or the food waste problem. So if we can really address the food waste issue, we'll be having a huge effect on carbon emissions, 8 to 10% worldwide, which, as a matter of fact, if you take that as a country, it's actually the third largest country emitter after USA and China. So the potential here is absolutely huge. So I think it's really important for people to understand, just without putting too much of a negative spin on it, how dire the situation is here and how much we do need to kind of course correct in this space. So yeah, those big headline facts, I think that can really get into people's heads and be those earworms when they're having their shower in the morning, just thinking about whatever before they go to work to make big decisions around food waste. I think would be really helpful if we were a bit more aware of those kind of things in the headlines.
100% agree.
Just to add my headline, because it stayed with me when I heard it, it was the fact that I believe it's 53% approximately of supermarket waste is food waste. That's a lot, right? If you consider the other is likely to be plastic, cardboard, etc., other things that are potentially issues as well.
Sorry, Nat, I was just going to say on the concept of the supermarkets and their role in this, this obsession that we have, because we're all consumers, that we all seem to have with the perfect piece of fruit or the perfect looking vegetable, is really unhealthy. And I know that some supermarkets around the world are kind of starting to slowly change the behavior here. You can often get like the ugly carrots, which will be discounted, which is great, but we need to see that on a kind of systemic change level. So this obsession over the aesthetics of an ingredient, I think we might need to unpack that a little bit and maybe move away from that obsession and actually look at how tasty that ingredient is instead as the key factor that we make our assessment and our buying choices on.
So the one thing I would just add to that, because ugly fruit was a big part of our kind of research and outcomes and stuff. So I'm a big fan of it, very biased towards it. But I was reading a report fairly recently that said in certain locations, ugly fruit had a detrimental effect on profitability, and therefore it's less likely to be stopped. I'm looking at one global market, the USA in particular, being a place where it was more difficult to sell ugly fruit than compared to, say, Europe. And as a result, the idea of ugly fruit therefore being used by restaurants, juice bars, etc., didn't really have that effect in regards to reducing food waste that you would hope it would have. So I agree with Patrick, it's a very important thing, but we need to change that story, how we tell that story, depending on the audience we are talking to the market that we are talking to.
And I also want to add another related to what Patrick said point that there's another thing that also makes us buy is the abundance. So if you have like one lonely banana sitting in the basket, it's probably not going to be sold because if it's the last one, it's probably there's something wrong with it. Whereas we've add 20 bananas next to it, and probably 3/4, like 3/4, will be sold within an hour. So
we had a term for that. It was called the last lettuce syndrome, right? Where it would just be left by itself, and had we placed 5 more around it, it would probably be sold, right? But it's a very, very good point, and that's that part of consumer education that kind of needs to come into it as well, right? Because then that affects exactly what Patrick was saying beforehand, that idea of being able to forecast accurately the demand, because you won't, and then you end up in this situation where you need more just to encourage people to buy the one. So yeah, it's this little vicious circle we need to get out of.
So there is a lot to be done on the consumer side to educate them and make them more aware that there's nothing wrong with that last lettuce or any other vegetable or fruit. And also another lesson to be done on the supermarkets, retailer side, so they will be more precisely predicting the demand. Jinder, would you like to speak a little bit more about the project you were involved? What were the key observations?
So yes, I'd be happy to, and I'll be happy, Patrick, for you to challenge me on some of these. So when we were undertaking our research in the market in Western Europe, we came across a few kind of insights that really stood out and have remained with me almost 10 years later, right? One of those being that people were more likely to reheat and re-eat their own food had they cooked it, rather than those that they had taken from a takeaway, right? The other thing I found, this may not be relevant, but this one interview question really came back to me, and it stayed with me for a long time. If someone wouldn't feed their dog the food that they had ordered, and I just asked why, and it was, well, I don't know what's in it, which is fair enough, but you're eating it as well, right? So that always stayed with me. But one of the big insights was, yes, there's work to do on the consumer side, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done on the infrastructure level here. I actually had a conversation with one of our attendees last week in our talks, and a lot of the infrastructure solutions that we have around waste in general, food, plastic, etc., they're born from the 80s, right? And they haven't evolved in the same way that many other technologies or business models have in that time, which is why I'm really happy Patrick's here, because one of those things that people need to start looking at is sustainable packaging. And even those products or materials that allow fruit to, fresh produce to last longer. There's lots of opportunities here. There's lots of avenues for innovation that could occur. And on that note, Patrick, I'm going to hand over to you to talk a little bit more about the idea of sustainable packaging and why it's actually so important.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So at Delivery Hero, we have something called the Global Sustainable Packaging Program, which is currently piloting in 8 of our markets, which is very, very exciting. Now, the purpose and the intent of that program is that Delivery Hero facilitates this, huge value stream, connecting, consumers with restaurants. That's our bread and butter. That's our kind of key business model that the company's grown off. Now, we don't enforce, the type of packaging that any restaurant partner has to use, because, like most businesses, we're all about free market and free market expression. But unfortunately, just because of the economics and the unit economics in the conversation here, is that most restaurant partners will use plastic packaging to package up their goods to put it on that delivery. And the reason why they use that is because it's the cheapest stuff available. And all restaurant partners are very cost-driven businesses, especially when we speak about small business economies. They will choose the cheapest solution that is the most functional, and that's their right as business people to do so. So a bit of a problem here, because if we just kind of sit back and let that play out, there's a lot of plastic packaging that our value stream, which we help facilitate, is creating. So what the Global Sustainable Packaging Program is doing is we're combining the aggregated demand from multiple markets and multiple restaurant partners worldwide, and negotiating a better price per unit of sustainable packaging with these global packaging providers. And then, because of our power and our representation, the economy of scale Delivery Hero can bring to that conversation, we can then pass that discounted pricing directly onto the restaurant partner. So when sustainable packaging normally for most restaurant partners can be somewhere between 2 to 4 times more expensive than the plastic stuff, we can make it the same price or cheaper. So it's this kind of huge internal economic model which we're trying to push out to 8 markets currently. And it's a pilot program, and thus far we're getting lots of good learnings and outcomes from the pilot, but it is something we're looking to expand as we come into 2022. So it's definitely something we're trying to push more and more of. And the markets that we're operating that program in is quite diverse, because we do want to kind of get learnings and understandings from all different regions of the world where there's different variability to this problem. So we've got 2 in our Pacific region in Hong Kong and Singapore. We've got 1 market in Latin America, which is Chile. We've got 2 in the Middle East region in the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. And then we've got 3 in Europe, which is Hungary, Germany, and Austria. So we're casting a fairly wide net to get as much learning, as much understanding as we can to kind of build the program overall. Now, I can see, Jinder, the question on your lips might be, okay, what is sustainable packaging and how are we actually defining it? Sustainable
that's
packaging.
one of the questions. I have
that's one of the
questions.
let me answer that one, and then we can jump into your next one. Sustainable packaging, as we define it, is packaging that's primarily made from agricultural byproducts. So, i.e., this packaging is using waste stream agricultural material, pressing it into packaging and giving it new life. So this ties directly into that key environmental concept of circular economy. So i.e., our sustainable packaging program is not extracting new virgin raw resources from the earth in its operations. These resources would exist regardless of us. We're just giving these resources new life and kind of upcycling them into packaging. And also, importantly, the packaging is compostable and biodegradable. And one of the interesting issues in this space when we talk about the waste stream infrastructure globally, it is what we would say in the business internally largely unsophisticated. So most food contact packaging is actually ending up in landfill or incineration. And so the key question becomes, okay, we're going to landfill and incinerate something. Do we want it to be petrochemical virgin plastics or fossil fuel plastics, or do we want it to be a plant-based agricultural byproduct material? Obviously, it's not a perfect solution overall, but it's far, far better than the current kind of modus operandi that this industry is working with. anyway, there's a little bit of a download on the Sustainable Packaging Program. Jinder, what was your question?
So that was one of them. And then the second one was, I just wanted to understand a bit more about the why, like what motivated Delivery Hero to actually take action in this?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, the honest answer is we're a big fish. We're a big fish in this value chain. And as one of the bigger fish, we see a kind of moral, ethical, and environmental imperative to act in this space. We have some power, we have some resources, and therefore we want to, use that for good, because we're a very value-driven business in everything we do. So the Sustainable Packaging Program is actually just one kind of example of that. We have other different environmental programs. One that you may have seen in the media is we do have a global carbon offsetting and reduction program. So operations are now carbon neutral in Latin America and in the European region, as they were as the end of last year. And we are very much on track to hopefully achieve our carbon neutrality globally by the end of this year as well. So two just kind of examples of some of our environmental programs, but we could jump much further down that rabbit hole if you'd like.
I've got one more question regarding the sustainable packaging program. Have you already noticed some differences on the markets that you are piloting the program?
Yeah, so currently it's in a deployment phase, as we say. So the first markets to kind of supply sustainable packaging to our restaurant partners is actually Hong Kong, as of about 2 months ago now. And so we're just starting to get some data back from that exercise. But what we're finding so far is there's a huge amount of interest here. There's a lot of kind of bigger restaurant chains and small chains saying, "Oh my God, sustainable packaging! This is awesome!" And they've been waiting for something like this to come on the scene. So from the current data, it looks like we will be quite disruptive in our efforts because it is kind of reinventing the model that most people are operating by.
That is amazing, and it actually shows us, takes us back to the beginning of the conversation, that we are all the part of the big ecosystem, and the big players have a lot of power to making the impact on the whole ecosystem. So this is great seeing that those efforts coming into reality. Let's focus maybe now. Just wanted to go back to the beginning of the whole supply chain, because there's food waste that happens at the very, very beginning when the food is being produced. Why it's still happening?
It's a big question, right? I suppose it's a case of how do we avoid it happening, or how do we prevent it from happening on the scale that it's happening at the moment? And I would say that what a lot of retailers, supermarkets, etc., are currently now understanding is that they need to improve the kind of transparency that they have of their processes, of their partners' processes, etc. Part of that transparency is to ideally see some form of either legislation or consumer advocacy to push them to behave in a correct manner. But also it's in that idea of improving their own agility across the supply chain. And I'm not sure if I'm making a sweeping statement here, but supermarkets traditionally don't necessarily have that overview or care too much. They have bargained their prices, use their power of economies of scale, etc., to find the right prices, and they know that they will be delivered to them and so forth. I think supermarkets need to understand that it's not just about the benefits that it could provide in regards to the fight against food waste, but just in their general agility across their supply chain. And to be honest, I would suggest that it is also painted to them, that idea of profitability, because unfortunately that's how we have to understand how certain machines and ecosystems still work. There are a number of individuals who are incentivized in a certain manner. We have to understand what those incentivizations are in order to paint the right story. And the one thing I always lead back to is the idea of the triple bottom line. So the idea of profits, of planet, of people. And that's how we need to help them to understand that this is much bigger than just one first order problem, as Patrick educated me today on that, and how it can influence other parts of their operations, of their organization.
Yeah,
Patrick,
maybe,
do you have anything to add? Yeah.
Just only a little bit, really. And basically, I think using the triple bottom line kind of assessment is a really good one. And ultimately, as a staunch environmentalist myself, I would love to see all companies on Earth use triple bottom line, 20 years from now, as their main kind of measurement of success. Some do, some don't, but hopefully the overall space is moving towards that. But in terms of how do we position this, to take your example, Jinder, around like supermarkets, over the last kind of 30, 40 years, typically using their economies of scale to, generate the kind of business model that best suits them. If we can start speaking their language a little bit in terms of where we can save them money and, where we can save cost, then I think we'll have a better shot of solving the food waste problem systemically. Now, what I mean by that is if we really kind of angle the conversation around food waste at a business level to proper supply chain management and a new level of transparency of supply chain management, which these new technologies and these new business models like quick commerce are enabling. So if we can show them that, hey, if you have this level of transparency, you have this kind of flow within your supply chain management process, i.e. not stocking so many goods in your warehouse, doing less stocking, using kind of more intricate hub and spoke models where you don't have a huge amount of capacity building up somewhere, that stuff going bad and then having to rush that out, half price off. If we can actually look at capacity planning on a kind of global food waste scale, and using the best tenets of the most modern technologies when it comes to supply chain management and AI, I think that is the future that we want to generate, and that is the business conversation we want to have with some of these large players, because for them they will be incentivized to do so because it's also going to save them money. So just to switch the paradigm a bit when we talk about this from a business perspective, let's talk about supply chain management and let's talk about transparency and let's talk about cost savings, because that is the language that will translate in business circles.
There's just two very quick things I would like to add. So I 100% agree with Patrick. And I think it's also in certain supermarkets in their operations is this digital shift that will need to occur, because there's still some that rely on game theory or the Hoof approach to forecasting, which are wonderful models, but very difficult to get right when it comes to that demand, what's the word I'm looking for, predictions that are needed, right? So the idea of maximizing profitability leads a lot of these types of supermarkets to let's just pack out the shelves with products, and then we just end up with waste. So we do need to see this kind of shift occur. And then the other thing is, exactly as Patrick said, this idea of increased transparency. We need it to a point where supermarkets aren't, or anyone involved in this, aren't thinking of it as a competitive advantage, but rather how to develop upon the work already done by others. So this idea of collective thinking to really drive home systemic change. And yeah, back over to you, Ms. Alia.
What do you think we need legislation to help make the change in those companies, or the market will sort itself out?
Some tough questions. I have an opinion, so I will use an example. And in the US, we've seen a lot of companies take a first step now in increasing the transparency, in fighting the food waste problem. Now, Natalia, you and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about the authenticity of retailers' actions in sustainability. And I would argue that I am a little bit apprehensive about the motivations here. And I think it can be to avoid legislation, because you are showing that you can self-regulate. Now, what France did back in 2016 was to introduce legislation that made it illegal for supermarkets to throw away edible food. This is the model I think that might be needed to kickstart systemic change. It was a brave move, but the problem is the power of some of these organizations in influencing, especially when they come together as a collective. It's less so to share information about sustainability and reducing food waste, but more to enhance their power in dealing with government institutions.
Maybe from my side to add to that, I can't say I am an expert when it comes to the current regulatory systems on food waste, but I can probably use some examples that are in my experience of managing this global sustainable packaging program. So within that, when we talk about regulation, we talk about regulation on plastic packaging. And right now there's 127 different countries around the world basically creating legislation which is banning or minimizing single-use plastic packaging. And now my view on that is that is a good thing because we need to kind of take two approaches to systemic change. There's the carrot approach, which is where we incentivize the change, and there's also the stick approach, where we just set a bottom line and say, hey, this certain practice is not good enough and shouldn't be done anymore. So to translate that to the kind of the food waste regulatory space, again, I'm not an expert. I think I would encourage any kind of regulation that sets what would be a sensible bottom line of transparency and action in this space. And I think it is a journey. You've got to bring the ecosystem, or in this case, the giant business player, on that journey with you. So yes, let's put in place some regulations, but let's also have those kind of conversations and that business dialogue, create that carrot for them to kind of move together. So it's a combination of the two is what I'd advocate for.
And also, sorry, just to add one thing very quickly to Patrick's points is there's a fear by a lot of governments that if I instill this legislation, what's the backlash going to be? But I think France, once again, is a wonderful example to use, because what we saw was this kind of new ecosystem of businesses and opportunities of these new ideas to assist those retailers in order to manage stocks and to reduce food waste.
Absolutely. And to maybe add to that further, the consumer expectations are changing. So, and I can say this with certainty from reading a whole lot of external research papers, but also from our own internal research at Delivery Hero. We are a data-hungry organization, and we measure everything. And we have found that the consumers' expectations and also consumers' buying decisions are changing over time. There is this new rise of the sustainability-minded consumer, this kind of new demographic that is coming through in the statistics and the data. So that's being felt in some places, in some markets and regions more than others. But overall, the consumer expectations is changing with more environmental consideration in mind. So with that changing consumer expectation, people should use their vote when they elect a new elected official who's going to actually kind of represent those values. And then that elected official should feel empowered to create the kind of legislation that their electoral base wants. And then, the same consumer is shopping at that supermarket, so the whole ecosystem should move together. So just to give us all a bit of hope, the rise of the sustainable-minded consumer is a thing, and it's getting bigger and bigger every day.
Kind of closes the circle. What, in your opinion, could be the bottom line here when it comes to food waste problem?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I understood the question.
Patrick referred to introducing the legislation, but also using the carrot incentive for the companies to actually implement good practices in the food to tackle food waste. So what could be that kind of bottom line legislation that would just basically prevent from really bad practices?
That's a difficult question. Right. That's a big question.
I'm
not sure if I have an answer, but I think it's along the lines of Patrick's answer to the previous question, of this advocacy that kind of needs to rise from the consumers and to put pressures not only on the supermarkets, etc., but on their own behaviors and on that of their peers, right? But I honestly don't see the needle moving enough without that legislation coming in. But what that legislation needs to be, I mean, France went all at it, right? All in with the no thrown away food. And I know that in some markets that just won't work. I don't have an answer, but what I would say is it's a problem that's on a global scale, but needs to be tackled at the local scale.
And my answer is probably quite similar to Jinder's. As I said, I'm not an expert when it comes to the regulations of food waste. But if we just take a bit of a step back and look at like some of the key tenets of environmental economics, most of the world's market economy operates on a free market capitalistic economy. That is a fact, and that is a truth. So we need to create the kind of incentives and disincentives to create the environmental change that we want. Now, when we talk about the first order problem of global warming, the very obvious and simple solution to any economist here is a tax on carbon. We need to disincentivize more carbon output, and we need to take that tax money and put it into renewable energy mainly to try and solve the global carbon problem or the global warming problem, I should say. And then if we think about the plastic packaging space, it's not very common, but there is a conversation to put a tax on plastic. And maybe that is a way forward for the industry over time. And so using that same logic, perhaps one day, there might be a tax on food waste. How we define food waste is a very interesting question. But that's the kind of economic mechanism that needs to occur to set that kind of bottom line. So again, this is speaking as an economist and a layperson largely in this food waste conversation. But that would be my read of the next kind of like 20 years if we want to kind of create the change that we all want.
And the one thing I thought about while you were talking there, Patrick, that I thought might help my last answer was in certain locations, I would like to see governments do more than legislation. I would like to see them take command, control, and innovate those new infrastructures that can encourage supermarkets, etc., to move away from the kind of, I don't want to say malpractices, but less than ideal practices.
We have one question from the audience. Out of curiosity, Patrick, do you monitor food waste in your operations?
Great question. So it is a consideration within our operations. We do have a few different initiatives trying to tackle the issue. One very simple initiative, which is just a really great example of where, one little change in product can have such a huge actual outcome. When I say product, I mean the functioning of the way, say, our software works. Because we have so many millions upon millions of consumers worldwide. If you change one little thing, that can create a huge ripple effect of outcomes. Now, our wonderful team in Food Panda Hong Kong, who's really, really engaged across lots of topics, but especially sustainability. They piloted this very innovative but very simple less rice feature. Rice is a key staple for a lot of the dishes there in Hong Kong. And a lot of consumers from consumer feedback are saying, look, I'm not finishing the portion of rice that comes with this delicious curry, whatever it may be. And so just adding just a simple kind of product toggle to say, give them a comment window, say, hey, can I just have less rice or half rice? A simple change in our software can lead to a huge amount of a huge reduction in the amount of food waste which that normal process might kind of create. So this is why, coming full circle back to the where we started the conversation, this is why I see the ability that technology companies in this space, like Deliveroo, here have to kind of disrupt and create change on a really tangible economic scale is huge. Because at the end of the day, technology, any technology, Deliveroo has technology, anyone's technology, it's a potential to have a huge multiplier effect. So that's kind of the kind of things that we're looking into on the Delivery Hero side of things, just to give you an example.
So just have one follow-up question there, Patrick, is so technology is clearly an enabler and it's just going to increase to do so. But I suppose it's that idea of mindset as well, and this mindset shift that needs to occur. Now, clearly at Delivery Hero, you guys have undertaken the importance of reducing food waste, carbon footprints, plastic, etc. How can we make that mindset more prevalent in industries? Right?
That is a very, very good question, Jinder. And if I knew the proper answer to that, I'd probably be worth a lot more. No, but in all seriousness, I think it's about inter-industry dialogue. That's the thing that's got to happen. So getting different companies operating the same space who are in competition with each other, agreeing kind of a baseline that we all want to work to. So when we talk about packaging, maybe us coming together as an industry, or the different food delivery companies worldwide, and saying, hey, why don't we all try and push for these standards, for this level of sustainability within the packaging, using these materials, using these technologies, and that's the basis for our innovation. We're all still in competition with each other, absolutely, but kind of setting like that baseline into industry standard, I think, is really important. And so this is, Jinder, where I might push the question back to you. In your experience and your research in this field, have you come across different major private companies doing industry collaboration to kind of set a baseline, or what's your experience?
So in food waste, I would say I haven't, but I'm sure that some do exist. I haven't directly come across any. What I have seen is in other parts of the, for example, the logistics issue. I've seen the Swedish return systems. They're a company that supply, I think, those crates for delivery, and it's the idea that rather than everybody having their own and wasting, etc., these guys supply and supply everyone in essence, and it's a shared system of reusable crates and pallets for the wholesalers and retailers. But the idea is that isn't seen as a competitive advantage. I won't necessarily look to build it internally. Let's use this. And then also when we look at technology companies, I think the mobile phone companies are a good example of having a shared pool of knowledge, where one company has been accused of just taking and not giving, but no names. But it needs to move into that idea, right? That idea of better knowledge sharing, as you say, across the different actors in the industry, right? Creating this idea of building on the collective. I know that that might be on my tombstone when I eventually die. But yeah, it's this idea of why is everyone trying to start from zero constantly? Other companies have taken it to a point. Let's continue from that point and put our resources here to move forward.
As we are slowly running out of time, and I wanted to touch on another one more topic regarding the apps that are aimed to basically take the whole food waste, that's the food that would probably end up in the bin and trash, and then sell it for a discount to the customer. One of these examples is Too Good To Go. Those apps, I believe, they are not mainstream on many markets yet, but I do believe that they have a big potential to actually make a change in that area. So what do you think it's going to be their role, and how can we make them more prominent across the whole market? Patrick, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that their role as an app or a startup technology company is hugely important. We need to kind of foster this kind of activity. One of the reasons I moved to Berlin, 3-4 years ago now, is Berlin is kind of the cradle of a lot of sustainability innovation, and there's heaps of different startups focusing on sustainability topics here. So I think as the overall technology ecosystem, or the tech industry, needs to kind of foster investment into these apps and cradle them and help them grow and create the business case and make the actual model work. So I think that's the role of the technology industry. To call out one in particular, there's a great little startup, if anyone wants to look it up on Google. It's called SPRK, or Spark. They're a Berlin-based tech company which is really doing some incredible stuff in terms of using AI to kind of connect oversupply with so to get a better balance between supply and demand. It's probably a better way to say it. So yeah, there's all these kind of technology companies out there that are kind of pushing this agenda. My experience in this space and the people I talk to don't tend to be on the consumer-facing side of this problem. They're more on the internal industry-facing side of the problem. But for any consumer-facing apps, I would just say absolutely use them. If you're an investor, foster that investment, help them grow, and help them disrupt the space.
I agree with Patrick.
Yeah.
I would say what I would like
It's
to
a lot
see.
of agreement.
Well, what,
today.
it's obviously an easy to solve problem, right? So, what I would say is I would like to once again shift some of the burden onto other players and more established players, and integration of these types of apps. So we reduce some of the obstacles to consumer adoption that currently exists. So that idea of the atomization of apps, people expect their apps to do more, but they have a tendency to use less and less. Different applications. So being able to foster a ecosystem within an app is kind of the way I would love to see it go. And when we then talk about other innovations in the space, I would love to see more adoption of those that don't necessarily make the consumer think straight away. So we can start to move the needle whilst we're educating consumers. And I would like to give a shout out here to a company called Appeal, who creates like a film that goes around fresh produce in order to extend its expiry date and its shelf life, right? As you may have noticed, expiry date seems to be a real personal thing to me, right? So yeah, that's one thing. Sustainable packaging is really important in this space, and the one I've come across more often than not is beeswrap, similar to what Patrick was describing at Delivery Hero. There's things that can be done, and there's things that can be done without trying to sell things that are at a higher price or a higher burden, etc. It's just about educating everybody in this space, the entire ecosystem, of the existence of these methodologies and these processes and this new thinking around the supply chain.
Thank you. I've got one very last question, Patrick. What would be like the three main things you would suggest, recommend to do for the businesses that would like to introduce sustainability into the core of the strategy? Where do they start?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So basically build the sustainable outcome straight into your revenue line, straight into your profit line, to make those two things the same thing. And there's a huge opportunity that a lot of businesses have at the moment because of this rise of the sustainable consumer that we discussed before. If you can show that you're building sustainable outcomes directly into your revenue line, more sustainable consumers will try and use you. So I always try to advocate, build the kind of business model that a climate denier would still use, because they still want the service or the product at the end of the day. So in my previous life, when I was back living in Australia, I helped to build the first carbon neutral delivery solution at the time, which is really focused on the kind of last mile logistics between business and consumer. So basically, that Amazon parcel, how are you getting that Amazon parcel? Making that process carbon neutral and using excess capacity in the backs of trucks and things to create a business. And then now it's grown to a greater rate of knots, and the company's called Sendle, very successful both in America and in Australia. And the key tenet there was build the environmental outcome directly into the core business offering. What did Sendle go out with? It said, hey, we're the first carbon neutral last mile delivery solution. Consumers loved it. The warehouses loved it. Delivery providers loved it. And that was the unique selling point. And that's how it grew. So build it directly into the revenue line, build it directly into the elevator pitch. It should be one of the first words that comes out of your mouth if you've only got 30 seconds with an angel investor in the elevator. Talk about how sustainability is directly tied to the revenue outcomes of what you're trying to push.
Thank you. Thank you. Jinder, do you have anything to add?
I can't disagree. I'm trying so hard to think of something, but I can't disagree. That's exactly how it needs to be done. It needs to be part of your core business model, part of your elevator pitch. I suppose the one disagreement I can fake right now is that idea of authenticity once again, and the idea of incumbents that currently exist. How do they pivot on that, right? That might be the one slight challenge for for existing businesses is how are they actually portrayed, what do they realistically do to change that image, and it's through authentic actions, right? So I'm not saying that it's something that they shouldn't try and do, I'm saying it's something they need to double down on, if anything, right?
Absolutely, and I think a good way to combat that problem, which is, I think what you're referring to there, Jinder, is greenwashing, is, by being really transparent in your kind of your business operations, showing what you're doing in your financial statement, your non-financial statement, all that reporting, be very, very visible, as well as, work with, globally respected NGOs like WWF, Greenpeace, whoever you can partner with who, to prove that you're doing the right thing. It can be really, really helpful. And then just hold yourself to account. I think that's really, really important. That the most important person to kind of audit a business is the leader of that business itself, and make sure you're comfortable with the environmental outcomes that your business is putting out into the world. Hopefully, they're positive ones.
So my final word is I couldn't agree more, Patrick.
There was a lot of agreement with today's conversation, but I'm super happy about. It was quite positive to see that the problem can be solved, but there is still a lot to be done. Thanks everyone for watching, but this is not the end of our series. We will meet in the same speakers next week, and Jinder and Patrick will be joining me for the discussion on how to reduce waste across the supply chain. Meeting same time, same place. Yeah, thank you so much for today. It was very insightful, and have a lovely rest of the afternoon.
Thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks. Bye.
And
thank you everyone.
For attending, Natalia.
No,
Bye.
thank you, Jinder. Thank you, Nat. Take care.